It's that time of year again. Hey peeps, it's the Pinking here. And now that we're closing off the year, it's time we once again rank the top 5 best and worst movies and shows of the year. Just remember, these are all the movies and shows I have seen. I have tried my best to watch as much as I possibly could this year, but if something is absent from this list, and it should be here for better or for worse, it's probably because I either haven't seen it yet, or it hasn't been released in my country yet. And just remember, this is my personal rankings. Just because I think these things doesn't mean you have to think the same thing too. So with that out the way, let's talk about my personal best to worst movies and shows of the year. I know I'm gonna get hate for this, but there is one main reason why Wish is here specifically, and that's because it's gotta be the most lazy film I have seen out of the entire year. This was supposed to be the big 100th year celebration of all things Disney. It was supposed to leave people glad that they have got to see the magic of Disney over all their lives, and yet all I wanted to do was just go to sleep. This movie has nothing new. They reuse worn out tropes, they hold on to Disney nostalgia, these characters were boring and completely replaceable, the villain was unfocused and underwhelming, and worst of all is the animation. We're currently in a renaissance, if you will, of animation, with movies starting to experiment more and try to make something truly memorable, try to be something that will stick with us for much longer. But Wish is not that. It's lazy 3D that's pretending to be 2D, and for me, one of the worst things your movie can ever do is to not try. And Disney's Wish did not even attempt to be anything special. It didn't try to be anything grand or big. It didn't even try to be terrible. It is probably the most boring outcome you could possibly get when you try to do nothing. And for something that's meant to be the 100th celebration, yeah, it's deserving of this spot. Again, probably gonna get a little bit of a controversial pick here, especially considering what's happened with Jonathan Majors, but for me, I feel Creed 3 was a fantastic addition to the Creed and Rocky franchise. It manages to take elements from the previous movies and give them their own unique spin. I loved how personal this movie is, with it really making me care for both Adonis and Damien, as it's able to make you feel sorry for Damien and makes you, as a viewer, on the edge of your seat when they have to fight, with it being helped by the absolutely stellar acting, the amazing choreography, and a tight blend between familiar and new. And not to mention, this movie is straight up gorgeous, with so many shots and scenes being something right out of a painting. It's that good. Now, there has been a fair few criticisms made against this movie by the fact it doesn't have Rocky. However, I feel it actually helps the movie because Rocky already had his story perfectly conclude in the previous movie. So to bring him back, especially in a story that already has a few parental figures, it would just kind of feel unsatisfied and very unjustified to him as a character. At least, that's what I feel at least. What else is there to say about this movie? We all knew what it was before watching it, and we were still left somehow disappointed. Indy 5 was a waste of talent, with everything feeling fake and phony. I did not once care about anything that happened, as its abysmal acting, terrible effects, and questionable story leave me just confused at how something so stupid and infuriating got made. And I can only imagine how bad it would have been for actual indie fans, because I'm not a fan of the franchise, and yet I'm still left with a feeling of secondhand embarrassment from the studio. As to why this film even needed to exist, I don't want to talk about this movie because there's nothing worth talking about. It's just that bad. Now, I already made a video on this movie, so if you want to know my full opinion on it, go watch that. But in short, I love this movie. This was more than just another MCU movie, but it was a love letter to these characters we've grown to love over the years, with it having tons of heart and bucket loads of emotion. With gorgeous cinematography and epic action, this movie manages to send off the Guardians in a way that felt honest and authentic. It felt like real people going through hard times that just so happened to have fantastic jokes and a truly imposing villain. The only complaint I can give this movie is that it's quite predictable. You will most likely know what's gonna happen at several points, but just because it's predictable doesn't mean it's not enjoyable. So for me, it deserves the spot, as it was able to tug on my heartstrings while making me grateful I got to know these characters. And honestly, this film just makes me excited to see what James Gunn can do with DC. If it's anywhere near this well done, then yeah, DC's in good hands. Dear God, do I need to say anything here? It's pretty much the same exact thing as Pinocchio was last year. Lazy, uninspired, ugly, and dull. Full of awful acting, awful effects, and awful characters. This just feels like an absolute chore to get through. Everything about this movie has already been said, and it's now just showing the pattern. Whenever there's a remake, it's completely awful and uninspired. This movie did not bother to give something worth of value, so I'm not gonna bother talking about it anymore, because other people have talked about this way more than I have, and at this point I'll just sound like a broken record, but this deserves to be in the worst list. Because this is just proof now that Disney is taking us for granted. They're taking everyone going to see these movies and remakes for granted. And you know what? It's costing them in the big run this year. Well, I have to be honest, this and number 2 was so hard to make a clear choice about. Both were absolute masterpieces. However, the reason why Oppenheimer ended up being number 3 is a problem I feel I'm in the minority about, and I think I'm probably gonna divide people, but however, this is what I truly felt after watching the movie, and I have to be honest about it. But first, let's talk about what I did like about this movie, the positives, which there are a lot of. This movie was one word and one word only: masterful. This film has such a great story, with it being a very nice and shortened analysis of Oppenheimer and his story. I was not familiar with the man himself before this movie, however while watching it, I was still able to be pulled into this incredible story. Through the goddamn spectacular acting, I swear everyone in this movie acts like their lives depended on it, and it fully shows. But for me, the thing I love about it the most is the sense of dread this movie leaves me. It shows the gradual descent into Oppenheimer's madness in a way that felt genuine, and along with the expertly built up to the bomb and even the aftermath, it all just feels so well done. It really goes to show that audiences will turn up to something that's a little niche as long as it's well done. However, my one major problem with this movie that holds it back from being number 2 is the editing. As I won't lie, at so many points did this movie's editing just take me out of what was going on. There are, at some points, it would just be going too much, and they would just constantly be cutting back and forth in between stuff to the point where it just felt like too much is being told in this very moment. But then the opposite problem would happen, where there wouldn't be anything going on and yet they constantly linger on it when they really didn't need to. Things cut off at awkward times, and it was with that I sometimes lost track at what point in the timeline certain things are supposed to be. Again, I feel like I'm in the minority here with those complaints, but that's just my honest experience and reason why this movie can only be number 3 for me instead of 2. So, you're probably starting to notice a pattern here. Nearly all the projects that I have in the worst have all come from Disney. Now, I do not want to be a part of the crowd that hates Disney because it's popular. After all, Disney are one big reason I'm the man I am today. But good lord, this year has truly been atrocious for them, hasn't it? Secret Invasion. Again, I did not want to put it here because so many people probably already have, but after watching it, I understand why it's just so hated. It is a new low for Marvel, with everything this series doing being just low tier crap at best. And honestly, it deserves its own video on why it's so garbage, and maybe I'll make it one day. But to just show you how low this series will go, it used AI to create a awful intro. And I hold a very strong negative opinion to the use of AI in movies and shows. Maybe that's worth a video on too. But if Marvel of all things are stooping so low to use AI to make an intro instead of paying their employees fairly, then yeah, you deserve to be number 2 worst. So yes, to me, Godzilla -1 just edges it against Oppenheimer for me. I just instantly fell in love with this movie. It really proved me wrong with not only being able to pay tribute to Godzilla and his history, but also evolve it in a story that on the surface level is pretty much the same story as Shin Godzilla. However, underneath, it's a bold and daring piece of art that is not afraid to get very, very dark. I loved the sense of dread, the sense of scale, the emotions, and best of all, it made me care about the human characters, which is nearly an impossible feat in any Godzilla movie. I did not watch this movie dubbed. I saw the subbed version of it. It was still in Japanese, but that still did not matter. I was still just as enthralled and hooked by the acting, as that was enough to get me engaged, and that just shows how good this movie is. To the point where I don't even speak the language the movie's in, and yet I still understand everything that's going on, and it still feels just as effective. If it wasn't for number 1, this would undoubtedly be the best. And as a Godzilla fan, I can say, that just makes me so happy. Are you even surprised? I'm not. I made an entire video of me just guessing what would happen in this show. And after watching it a few months ago with a friend who had the streaming service, because I just refused to spend my own money on it, it pisses me off more to know everything I said was right all along. Everything I said was pretty much true. And that just shows how truly pathetic this show was. The fact that me, a stupid YouTuber, was able to guess all of the show on a whim is truly pathetic. It was cringy, painfully unfunny, terribly miscasted, and you cannot convince me otherwise, but this show was always bait. It was intentionally made to be this awful, with a popular beloved brand, to get attention the cheap and easy way. And that's exactly what I thought it would be, and now I know it is. That's why I refused to talk or watch it at first, because I did not want to support stuff made to intentionally bait and cause drama. Which is something a lot of these YouTubers who review stuff on here do not understand. They do not understand by reviewing this and constantly being angry at it, you're giving it attention, and so you're making other people be curious enough to watch it. Hence why we are getting a fucking second season of this. Yes, they're actually making a second season of Velma. God, kill me now. I'm quite frankly sick of bait shows. Stuff that intentionally does these decisions to just bait hate from people, to cause an outrage. It is pathetic. It was the lowest tier of grabbing attention and getting popular. And for that, we deserve better. You deserve better. I deserve better. We all deserve better. And so, this is my number one worst show of 2023. Phew. Before I get to number one, best, I want to go and show some of your choices, as I asked you all on Instagram for what your best and worst shows and movies were. And your ones were these. Your worsts were Wish, Mandalorian Season 3, Napoleon, Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey, and Fear. And your bests were John Wick 4, David Tennant's return in Doctor Who, and of course, Barbie. Your opinions I found to be quite interesting, and I definitely agree with a lot of these picks from you guys. So please, if you haven't already, tell me in the comments what are your best and worst movies and shows of 2023, and why so? Oh, and also subscribe, thank you. And finally, my number one best movie or show of the year is... Yeah, if you haven't been keeping up with my channel, this will not come as a surprise to you. But to me, this is absolutely trumps everything that came out by a landslide. I have not been this inspired, this invested, and this engaged for a movie since Infinity War. I truly cannot get over this movie. It was the only movie I watched not once, not twice, but 4 times in theatre. Just because I couldn't get over just how good it was. The story, the animation, the characters, the music, the execution, and the passion. It just bursts from the screen, and no matter how hard I try, I simply cannot get over this movie and how it to me is the best Spider-Man movie ever made. It truly understands what it means to be Spider-Man, to not only as Spider-Man himself, but to us fans. And for me, this movie hits so close to home, as its messages and themes, especially with Miles, have hit really close to home for me. And I cannot believe how realistic and truly honest this movie shows that. It's not preachy, but it's true. To me, this movie proved that we have been underestimating animation for far too long now. And quite frankly, this movie kind of changed my life, as it's now probably one of my favorite movies of all time. So if you haven't already, watch Across the Spider-Verse. This movie's wonders are truly a seen to be believed kind of deal. And there you have it, peeps, my top 5 best and worst movies and shows of 2023. This has been a rough year for movies, with the strike shaking up the media world and the fear of AI stealing everyone's jobs. But through the year, we still managed to get some absolute gems that will stay with us for a long time. Here's to hoping 2024 has better stuff, and whether it's good or bad, I'll be here to tell you about it. I've been the Pink King, and this is my final goodbye of 2023. See you all next year.